Trump hates America, because America is not the people. It's not. It's not the culture and people that founded it, that built it, that created it. It is the set of ideas.
Right.
And the set of ideas is religious tolerance, which it wasn't. I mean, look, the religion. I mean, this Hateful Heretic has a great line. I think it's still pinned on his Twitter, which is like, if the Second Amendment only applies to muskets, then the First Amendment only applies to Christianity.
Exactly.
Because if we're gonna be revisionist like that, if we're gonna go back and say, they couldn't have foreseen the AK-47. Well, guess what? They also couldn't have foreseen. Yeah, they couldn't have foreseen the AR-15. They couldn't have foreseen Muslim suicide bombers either.
Think they could foresee foam parties?
Well, they probably were having those. No.
Yeah.
I mean, look, it's like, if that's your argument, okay, like literally a thing that came out to stop the bloodletting between Catholic and Protestant, which was the purpose of that clause,
right,
is now being interpreted that we have to let religious, like hostile religious invaders into our country and let them practice their hostile religion.
Yeah.
Which they would never have tolerated. They would never have tolerated. And if those people started blowing us up in the name of their religion, it would have been over.
The great error of liberalism as an ideology is basically this. Liberalism came about in the 17th century as a response to the Reformation and the religious wars. Okay, it's very interesting. There are ideas that I, as a philosopher, thought must be nigh eternal, right? Like the idea of sovereignty. Well, it turns out that the idea of sovereignty, when the idea of sovereignty was actually defined? 1648 in the Treaty of Westphalia. This is not some eternal principle. This was a necessary compromise to end more than nearly 150 years of religious warfare, including a 30-year war in the center of Europe that killed half the population of Germany, right? Liberalism is a set of ideas that were sort of jerry-rigged together. It's just a contraption of compromises and evasions and decisions not to talk about certain things and decisions to render certain huge facts of reality invisible. Why? Because we had to bring peace between the Protestants and the Catholics, and that was it. And then once this compromise was finally solidified as an ideology, we somehow came to think that this was written into human nature. It was eternal, and not just eternal, but applicable to everyone, right? So, and it's a deep, fundamental, foolish error. The liberalism doesn't have a very ancient pedigree, and it doesn't stand up to real critical analysis, and it especially doesn't stand up when you actually compare it to classical political philosophy. And why? Well, because liberalism is based on just deciding that we're not going to talk about things like human nature. Yeah, you just can't talk about that anymore, right?
Yeah.
We can't talk about the common good anymore. That's like totalitarianism. You don't want to go there. We can't talk about race. We must be blind to certain things. The people who preach blindness.
You can't talk about. You can't talk about what it means that this Muslim guy waving the Constitution writes scholarly articles on Sharia law. Like, well, what is it? I mean, literally, this is.
What does that matter?
Go on Facebook and start talking about it and see the response you get. It will literally be, "Why do you care?
Why do you care?
Why do you care?" Well, I care because this is an ideology fundamentally at odds with our culture. That's why I care.
Yeah. No, I think you should be blind to that. And the way I put it a lot is, maybe I'm repeating myself, people who say you should be blind to stuff are generally up to something they don't want you to see, right? We have to be blind to ethnicity. Why? Well, because somebody who's usually pushing that idea is engaged in nothing but the lowest form of ethnic nepotism, usually at your expense. right? And you're going to be piously blind to it. I love the objectivists, racism is barnyard collectivism. And they never noticed the fact that Ayn Rand's inner circle they're literally all Jews who are all cousins or married to one another. I guess they just happen to be the best people. What a coincidence, right? They just happen to be the best,
Yeah, and it's also the other way that this happens is that you become there's somebody who's like they very much believe in this liberalism, and then they don't want to see it undermined, so you can't notice. Like if I'm like a cucky white guy and I very much believe in liberalism, and I think that the black crime and violence is because of racism, I want to very much. I hope you don't notice it. I want you just to not notice it. I'm glad the media doesn't cover it, because that way people just maybe aren't aware of it. But if you do become aware of the vast disparity in crime and the propensity of towards violence of blacks, I will. Why are you looking at that?
Yeah, there's something suspicious about that.
It's weird. Why do you care? I mean, these are reactions we have all gotten when going on social media and engaging normies. It's like, why? One, they don't believe it. Two, you show them facts, and why do you know that?
There must be something wrong with you.
Yeah, there's something weird about me that I know the truth. Yeah, why would you want to know the truth? And that comes from this ideology of like, yes, we have to just look away and ignore these differences. And I guess it worked in this historical circumstance to get Catholics and Protestants to stop murdering each other, but it's not going to get Muslims to stop murdering us.
Yeah, right? We got to start noticing these things again.
We were the same people divided by this stupid volcano ideology, and we had to get past it. And unfortunately, this was kind of this cucky way that we got past it. I think now we need to understand that the volcano ideology doesn't matter. It's us as the people that matters, and we're going to get killed by these hostile outsiders unless we actually learn to start discriminating again.
Exactly. That's really well said.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that our people came to realize that the volcano ideology doesn't really matter. It's not worth killing each other over.
But
it doesn't mean that we need to let in all these foreigners that believe it.
Yeah, exactly. I love this shit lib meme. Another Muslim suicide bomber. Christianity has a long history of violence and intolerance. Why are you talking about Muslims? It's like, well, if you really believe that Christianity is such a violent, intolerant religion, and yes, you've certainly got history on your side, why do you want to borrow more trouble, right? Why do you want to borrow more trouble by importing these people who still believe they're violent, intolerant religious ideology?
It's like you're giving us examples from hundreds of years ago, and here we have people that are doing it today in the Middle East. Sunnis and Shiites are massacring each other in horrifically high numbers. And we are expected to believe that they're just going to leave that behind them when they come to the U.S. or they come to Europe. It's absurd.
Yeah, the refugees are not innocent and good people simply because they lost a battle. They were just not strong enough to win.
Just on the other side.
Yeah, and if they were a little bit stronger, they'd be chopping off the heads of their enemies and machine gunning their children in ditches. I mean, these are not the kind of people you want to import into your country. But liberalism is a kind of madness, and it was a great compromise.
It's a mental disorder.
For a while.
Borders language and culture.
Yeah, for a while, it was a great compromise that got us out of the religious wars, but it is not a universally applicable ideology, and we're learning that slowly, the trouble with most people is they don't learn by reason, right? They don't listen to wiser people. They have to learn by suffering. And the trouble with liberals is that, they always seem to skate, you know? They never seem to suffer the consequences of their own shitty ideas. They always seem to fob that off on somebody else. I don't know what their secret is, but they always seem to be able to do that. They always seem to be somewhat insulated from the consequences of the ideas that they preach. And I think part of that is simply the fact that they wouldn't preach it.
Insulated.
Yeah. They wouldn't preach it if they weren't insulated from it, I guess. It's really and that's why that's why a neocon is a liberal who got mugged, right? The insulation broke down and suddenly reality burst into their lives. And if they survived that encounter with reality, suddenly they changed their views.
Yeah, I mean, you see often enough. I mean, unfortunately, too often people that do get sort of red pilled by life do then fall into something like neoconism rather than, our view of things. Although that's going to change, right?
Like it is changing.
Increasingly, they're going to come to us. They're not going to go. They're not going to go to the neocons because now the neocons went up against us. All of a sudden, decide it's funny how neocons and liberals, when faced with Trump, who is sort of a I will say sort of a proto-white nationalist, or at least they think he is. We think he's not entirely satisfactory. They think he's fucking Hitler, and they're not just exaggerating this time. Suddenly, neocons and liberals realize how much they needed each other. They realized why can't we just have it the old way? Why can't we just go back?
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, they were up on stage, right? And, one guy, pantomimes a punch and the other jerks his head back and says, and then some guy behind the curtain, smacks something. And we're sitting out in the audience thinking, wow, these people are really duking it out, right? It's
like pro wrestling, right?
It's just pro wrestling, right? Exactly. It's pro wrestling. And
I think another meme that this guy that we were talking to the other day was saying he said, do you want a pro wrestler that knows he's in a pro wrestling match, or do you want one that thinks it's real? Which was basically, he was referring to Trump and Hillary, which I thought was a great line.